Hello, everyone. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, or where you are. That's the time. I know we have people listening in from literally all over the world. That's actually true. So, anyway, wherever you are, thanks for joining. This is going to be pretty cool. Human Animal Bond Association bringing you another cool thing here, another actually really most interesting webinar on us, on a topic probably most of us don't know much about, really, including me. And so, my name is Patrick Flynn. I'm the president-elect of Human Animal Bond Association, and I will not be talking too much longer because you don't want to hear from me. But Emily Trinetti is with us tonight. She is one of my favorite people and also a former classmate of mine at Canisius College, where we got our master's degree in anthrozoology. She's also a huge overachiever, so I could spend like the next 20 minutes talking about all the things that she's done and everything, but I will let her pick out the ones that she wishes to tell you about. But tonight we're going to talk about, again, a really cool topic and a pretty hot topic. And speaking of hot topics, she also was co-presenter on a module for our Human Animal Bond Academy. If you have not discovered that, it is a freebie for members and is a really cool resource of information. But what she presented was information on consent, which again is a topic that a lot of us don't know much about. And it's something really worth learning about. It's going to be a pretty hot topic up and coming, as is humane education. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily to keep on rolling.
Cool. Thank you so much, Patrick. I really appreciate it. And I'm really appreciative of the Human Animal Bond Association for the opportunity to share this exciting topic with everyone. Yeah, hopefully, everything goes smoothly. I think it might take us a few seconds. I think there might be a little bit of a delay with advancing the slides, so bear with me. I tend to talk fast, so I'll try to slow it down between slides. Or maybe I'll try to advance the slides before I'm actually finished talking. Um, so my name is Emily Trinetti. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have a few different credentials related to animal behavior and training. And then, as Patrick mentioned, I also have my Master of Science in Anthrozoology. I provide behavior and welfare consulting through my business Coexistence Consulting. And I'm also a co-founder and director of the Humane Alliance of Rescue Trainers, which is a nonprofit that matches shelters and rescues with professional trainers for no-cost behavior support. And then I'm also pursuing my Doctor of Education in Educational and Professional Practice with a specialization in humane education from Antioch University. So I'm really, really enjoying the program, and it's really made me just so passionate about the topic of humane education, which is why I'm here with you all today to kind of share with you what I've been learning. So we're going to look at what comprehensive humane education is. And we're also going to discuss the role of critical thinking and empathy development in humane education and why these things are so important. And then we're going to look a little bit more closely at some specific strategies for promoting compassionate action and deepening the bonds that humans share with their companion animals and beyond. So just to kind of get everyone ready. So we are going to do a quick little exercise. That's how we're going to start out the session today. So I think you all should be able to type in the chat. And if you're watching the recording, you can take out a piece of paper and a pen or open up your phone and maybe click on a note-taking app. Because I'd like you to record your answers as we kind of progress through the next few slides. So, get ready. Again, if you're watching the recording, you can press pause to grab the things that you need. And hopefully you're able to chat, type in the chat if you're here live, or if you prefer not to share in the chat, you can also take out a pen and paper. So I want us to critically reflect on, this question here that I have on the slide. What are your biases about other animals? And over the next 6 slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a different species, and then I'd like you to write down on that piece of paper or in the chat the first words that come to mind. And it just has to be, 1 or 2 words per animal. And again, the first ones that come to mind, no cheating. So here we go. So the first picture we're looking at is the dog. What is the first word that comes to mind? I'll give you just a couple seconds per slide, but I don't want to give you too long because it's supposed to be that first word. Okay, now we're moving on to the cat. What are the first words that come to mind when you see this picture? Okay, now we have some pigs. What are the first words that come to mind? And next, we have a chicken. And now we have a rat. And finally, we have a bat. What is the first word that pops into your head? And I am not actually sure if I can see the chat. I haven't used GoToWebinar too much. So I'm gonna just kind of keep moving, and then maybe at the end I can play around with looking at the chat. Just because I don't want to like mess anything up by clicking too many things on my screen. So but I'll definitely take a look at the end if I can, at what your responses were. But this exercise is less for me and more for you. Um, so thank you for participating in that. And now I would like you to look over the words that you wrote down for each animal, and just kind of think about them, and think about, do these words reflect some of the biases and assumptions that you might have about these animals? And how do these words compare to each other? So I did this exercise with my spouse, and he had some really interesting responses. And so I took a picture of the piece of paper that he wrote on, and here it is. Hopefully you can see it, although I know that the slides might be progressing a little bit more slowly than they are on my end. But yeah, so these are his responses. Hopefully you can see them. And as I look through his responses, I can definitely see some biases and assumptions coming through in the words that he chose. So cute came to mind when he saw the dog and the cat. And yet with the pig, he wrote down dirty. And then with the chicken, he thought gross and annoying. We might have some personal experiences with chickens that might maybe come from that. And then apparently pizza came to mind when he saw the picture of the rat. And of course I was like, why did pizza come to mind? And he was like, oh, the pizza rats in New York City. And of course, I then had to Google this, and apparently, there's some viral YouTube videos of rats carrying pizza slices throughout New York City, so which is actually quite entertaining. So that's what he associates when he saw the picture of the rat. And so this is the question to consider, right? So why do these words come to mind for you? Why do you hold these beliefs about these animals? I think sometimes we have these associations with other animals, and we don't often kind of stop and think about, well, why do I think that? Where does that come from? So pause and reflect on that. And I think we should also kind of challenge ourselves to consider if the assumptions that we have about these animals are valid, and how might others perceive your beliefs about these animals. I think sometimes when we look at our biases from kind of an outside perspective, it can, be a little bit enlightening. You'd be like, wow, I guess maybe that's, a little bit weird that I think that, or maybe the animal doesn't really deserve that kind of association. And so, it's worth thinking about it from like, again, that outsider's perspective. And it's interesting because like my husband shared, the first word that came to mind for him was dirty when he saw the pig. But it's interesting. Like I asked him, I was like, so is that assumption valid? And once he actually like paused and thought about this, he remembered a visit that him and I actually took to a pig sanctuary, and we were talking to the person who owns that pig sanctuary, and they shared with us how, oh yeah, pigs get a really bad rap. People think they're dirty, but they're actually really clean animals. They actually get really stressed when they're not able to keep themselves clean. And so, once I kind of reminded my husband of that, or once he kind of came to that, or once he remembered that, he was like, oh wow, that's really interesting. Like I can't believe I didn't think about that. And so, it's interesting, to consider, how we feel about other animals, and if it reflects, if these feelings reflect what we actually know about them. And if we don't know much about that animal, can we change that? Can we do a little investigating? Can we, take some time to learn more about what that animal really is like? So maybe we are starting to realize that you have some biases about other animals, and that's okay. We all have biases about other animals. And that includes those of us who have devoted our lives to caring for and protecting other animals. But again, many of us don't pause to critically reflect on the biases that we hold. And it's not our fault for not doing that. It's just that we really haven't been taught to do that. And it's something that, especially kind of in our fast-paced lives, we don't really think, we just don't think to kind of pause and think about, why do I feel this way? It's hard to kind of stop and think about our thinking all the time. But how we perceive our how we perceive other animals, it shapes our behavior towards other animals. And so it really is important and worth the time and effort that it takes to acknowledge and confront our biases about them. These biases, these cognitive biases, play a role in why, puppy mills and factory farms persist, despite the general awareness of the suffering that these practices cause. We all kind of know that these things aren't great, and yet we kind of just turn a blind eye towards them, or away from them. And so, I think that part of that is kind of the that cognitive dissonance, these cognitive biases that we have. And so it really is worth considering the, again, how we think about other animals, and especially how our behavior might be influenced by the way that we think about them. And this is also true for the biases that we share about other humans. So as you consider, how your cognitive unconscious biases may influence how you treat various species, think about how they impact how you work with other humans too. And I've definitely had to kind of reflect on this a lot myself. I've worked in a variety of settings doing client care. I've done client care in veterinary hospitals and animal shelters, and quite a few other contexts. And I've learned that over the years, I was able to see that I was kind of quickly coming to these assumptions. I was making assumptions about whether or not people were good companion animal guardians, based on some factors that really probably didn't have much to do with whether or not they were actually a good guardian or not. And this, of course, shaped how I perceived or how I treated those people. Like for example, like I often worked, when I worked at one of the shelters that I worked at, I was doing, I worked at adoptions. And so, if I made these assumptions that someone was not going to be a good pet guardian because of XYZ, then I could, even unconsciously be putting up some extra barriers to that person adopting a particular animal. And so it's really important to be aware of this. And it's important to kind of dig into, what am I thinking? Why am I thinking this? And how is it affecting my behavior towards these individuals? Because, it certainly isn't fair, right? If we have these cognitive biases that are then, impacting the, number of barriers that we put up if someone wants to adopt an animal, or even just in terms of, how we treat someone who is going through something, like at a veterinary hospital, for example. And so, we really need to think about these things. And, for me, like as an example, or another example, this was especially true when it came to like guardians who were relinquishing their pets when I worked at, when I've, been involved with animal shelters. And when I was working in the veterinary hospitals, I felt these kind of biases, these assumptions, kind of crop up when, people couldn't afford veterinary care for their animals. And so I was luckily kind of going through grad school at the time. I was doing that anesthesiology program with Patrick. And that really helped me to, start to critically think about these biases that I had. And, it kind of gave me the motivation or helped me see how important it is to really let myself hear their stories, hear the stories of the people that I'm working with, that I'm trying to help, and allowing those stories, allowing their perspectives to kind of help me question my own beliefs about that person. And so I was, able to become more aware of my cognitive biases and start to actively resist them and reshape them. And so, think about this, right? Think about like, well, what are your beliefs about people who relinquish their animals? And do you find yourself making assumptions about people who can't afford veterinary care? And if you're here and you're an animal trainer, what are the biases that you have about people who use certain training methods? There's lots of different things that we're faced with when working with other animals and people, that kind of trigger some of these stereotypes, these assumptions. And so how likely is it that these beliefs and assumptions fully reflect, the lived experiences of these fellow humans? These are all questions that we should be reflecting on a regular basis in our work as pet professionals. And so this is a quote that's really kind of stuck with me lately. So Stephen Brookfield is a scholar who focuses on teaching adults. And he wrote that thinking critically lies at the heart of acting powerfully. So I believe that we must work to strengthen our own critical thinking skills so that we know how to act powerfully to improve the welfare of other animals and the people who care for them. And then we can also teach and encourage others to engage in these skills. Already education is often at the core of what we do as animal professionals. And I believe that we can help our clients and community members and colleagues to start to think critically about other animals, about the relationships, the bonds that we share with them. And in doing so, maybe we can then deepen those bonds that we share with these animals because we are critically thinking about, our relationships with them, how we interact with them. And, while education is a huge part of what we do, most of us haven't been taught much, if at all, how to actually be educators. We aren't formally taught how to teach others to confront their own biases. And so, even those of us who specialize in, motivating behavior change in non-human animals, doing the same in our human clients is a struggle, right? Teaching a dog to sit is easy in comparison to teaching a biased human to think differently about another species. So how do we do this? How do we, as pet professionals, teach our clients and communities to think critically so that they can act powerfully for the welfare of other animals? And so finally, this brings us to humane education. Humane education is a field that has significantly evolved since it started taking shape in the late 1800s, which surprised me when I learned that it's been around since the late 1800s. And it began, largely as a movement to encourage children to be kind to non-human animals. And it had a focus on preventing the cruel treatment of companion animals. And one of the underlying goals was to prevent cruelty towards humans, because there had started to become more discussion about a possible link between non-human animal abuse and human abuse and violence. And the forms of animal abuse that educators and advocates sought to prevent were often, the socially unacceptable individual acts of physical harm and neglect. So, intentional torture and dogfighting. But the socially sanctioned forms of animal abuse, such as factory farming and habitat destruction. So the forms of, the things that were kind of a part of our culture that contributed to animal suffering, those were not historically addressed by humane education. And so preventing cruelty to individual companion animals is absolutely critical. And we need that to be, a part of our mission, of course, as pet professionals, but also as humane educators. But I think it's also important to consider the many other ways that non-human animals suffer and how we can attend to this, via humane education and via our roles as, professionals who work with other animals, who, advocate for the welfare of other animals. So, we shouldn't just aim for a world that is humane for only a few individuals. We really need to aim for a humane world for all. So that's, why I'm here, why I think that, pet professionals, we have such a unique opportunity to shape how we, as a society, see, perceive other animals and how we treat them. So now kind of in our historical journey, we come to meet Zoe Weil, who is one of the trailblazers that has been working to shift the perspective of humane education from, a more narrow focus to one that is really examining the interconnectedness of non-human animal protection, environmental preservation, and human rights. And so Weil co-founded the Institute for Humane Education back in 1996, which has really played a pivotal role in the evolution of humane education. And so the Institute for Humane Education, their mission is to create a more humane world for all beings. And that includes humans, it includes, the environment. And so, Zoe and the Institute for Humane Education, they really continue to inspire the field of humane education to grow and evolve, and it really is changing. I've only really been involved in this field for the last few years, and I've really seen a shift, and it's growing more and more into this very comprehensive and inclusive endeavor, which is very exciting. So according to the Institute for Humane Education, they define humane education as something that helps people put core values of kindness, empathy, generosity, and or responsibility and integrity into practice in a complex, globalized world in which our daily choices affect humans, non-human animals, and ecosystems across the planet. And so this comprehensive approach is reflected in how I define humane education in my research and in my work as a pet professional. So I define it as an educational practice, an approach to practicing others that teaches and inspires critical thinking, empathy development, and compassionate action in how humans interact with all animals, including humans and the natural world. In many ways, we already do this as pet professionals. We educate guardians about their pet's behavior and welfare, and in doing so, we prompt them to critically think and deepen their empathy for their pets. And we also hope that this will then inspire them to change their own behavior towards their pets. Whether that's, changing their training methods or making sure they're exercising their pet enough so that or feeding their pet a healthier diet. There's so many different ways that we ask our clients and our community members to change their behavior towards other animals. And so far that's really been focused on inspiring these clients to change their behavior towards, again, their companion animals. But what if we were even more intentional in the way that we educate our clients? Could we do even more than just help the individual companion animals in front of us? Of course, that's very important. That's why we do what we do. But I think that there's opportunity to teach people skills that they can apply to other relationships that they have with other animals, with other humans, and and the environment. I think that if we can do this, if we can integrate this comprehensive approach to humane education into our work, we can play a role in some of the necessary and urgent societal changes that need to happen and how we treat other beings and how we treat the planet. Very exciting. So, thus far with humane education, children have been the primary audience. This is wonderful and needed and important. But I think it's important to recognize that, educating adults can be an important piece of this, especially given how urgent some of the issues that we're faced with, in regards to like climate change and, the fact that many animals, non-human animals and humans are suffering, right now. So I personally am very passionate about teaching adults. And I really love this quote. So teaching children kindness to all living beings requires a change in perspective of adults. And I think that, that's very true, right? I think we would be a lot more successful at implementing change if not only our children were being taught these things, but if we also believe them as adults. But unfortunately, many adults don't really have a lot of opportunities to learn how to critically reflect on issues like social justice and animal welfare and environmental preservation. And so one thing I'm really interested in looking at is, how can we as pet professionals provide an opportunity for this perhaps? We invest so much time in educating our clients, is there a way to kind of integrate into our everyday interactions with them opportunities for people of all ages to engage in even the smallest level of critical reflection? So another great quote that I've come across in my research, education and awareness raising play a pivotal role in increasing society's consideration of non-human animal welfare. So, we can teach and guide people of all ages, including adults, on how to make humane choices that reduce significant suffering across species. And, there's been research on how, humans, like people, the general public, they really do look to pet professionals for kind of insight on how to treat other animals. Veterinarians especially play an important role in the public kind of perception of other animals. And of course, we also have, people also look to, animal professionals who are like on TV and stuff, which is, we have all obviously seen that that can be a problem. But I think that knowing that is important, and we can use that knowledge. We can use this recognition of how much sway that certain individuals have over our culture, over our societal perceptions of other animals. We can use that to kind of do good, do the good that we need to do. But of course, we all have to kind of be aware of this. And so I think part of this is kind of shifting our like how we view education. I think we tend to see education as something that takes place in a classroom. But that's not the case. Animals learn all the time. So again, humans are animals. And if you're an animal behavior professional, we say this often, animals are always learning. The same is true for humans, again, because we're animals. And so in veterinary sheltering and training contexts, our clients and communities are learning from, all of the things that we say, and they're also learning from what we do. They're seeing how we interact and handle other animals, and they're learning from that. They're kind of, we're very social animals, so that's important for us, is to see how are the professionals handling these animals. And so, humane education can take place in how we interact with each other, and in how we learn from each other. There's this really excellent paper on how shelter workers and volunteers can integrate humane education into their interactions with the public. The author is Leslie Irvine, who is fantastic. And she described how these interactions can provide a window of educational opportunity that may open only briefly. So that's important, and it's also important to acknowledge that taking advantage of that brief window of opportunity is not always easy. People come into our shelters, our veterinary hospitals, they come into our training businesses with opinions and attitudes and misconceptions about other animals and their behavior and their welfare. And this unfortunately results, or can result in improper care, sometimes even cruelties, very often unconsciously. It really is this such a salient example of how, our assumptions, our beliefs, our misconceptions about other beings can influence our behavior towards them. One paper talked about this. I really recommend this paper, especially if you work with dogs. Philpotts et al. Pointed out that in most cases, owners do not deliberately set out to cause harm or suffering, but this can occur due to a lack of understanding of their animal's needs. And so that's what we do, right? That's so important as in our roles as pet professionals, is how can we educate our clients about these animals' needs so that they can better meet those needs. But navigating these interactions can be challenging. In Irvine's paper, she discussed how shelter workers and volunteers must have these emotional and social skills to make these interactions conducive to learning. And one strategy that Irvine described is to produce a positive emotional state in the students, even if we are feeling angry or appalled at the misconceptions that they hold. And sometimes that does happen, right? Sometimes people share their beliefs about other animals with us, and we can be surprised about those beliefs, to say the least, or and sometimes it can be very frustrating, um and sometimes, we want to say what's on our mind in those moments and say how they're wrong. um and and I think that, at least in my experience, and kind of what Irvine is talking about in this paper is, that is not making the interaction conducive to learning, by responding from this place of frustration and anger and surprise. Um, and in fact, we need to actually really take a moment and listen to how our learners, how the clients that we're interacting with, or the community members that we're interacting with, how are they feeling? Why do they feel this way? Why do they hold these beliefs? And again, managing our own emotions in response to what our learners share with us. Because responding in anger or frustration decreases the likelihood that that person is going to be receptive to your perspective. And so, ideally, we find a way to deepen our empathy for that other person. You know, can we find a way to empathize with what they're feeling and experiencing? A lot of the beliefs that humans have about other animals kind of come from a place of, you know, being frustrated with the animal's behavior, or just not understanding, what that animal is experiencing. And so when we can create this space where, these people, these clients, where they can feel heard, they're much more likely to also listen. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Sometimes I feel like it's like a mantra, like, I have to listen, or I have to listen in order, for them to, take the time to listen to me. And I think it's hard to do, but I think it's really important. And so, pet professionals can integrate humane education and how we interact with other animals. And into how we interact with other humans, in a variety of contexts. So we can, kind of take this approach when we are doing client care and communication, and of course when we're doing client education. We can integrate this idea of humane education into how we interact with other animals. In our marketing and advertising, such as social media posts, we need to be aware of the type of language that we're using to describe animals, and how this might influence how people perceive these animals, and then, of course, how we then treat those animals. And last but not least, humane education should be integrated in how staff, volunteers, how we are trained, and how we, interact with each other on a daily basis. So why is humane education so important? How is it any different than what you're already doing? Why does this matter? And for me, I keep kind of coming back to, the whole goal of humane education, which is to reduce suffering across species in the natural world. And, of course, a lot of us are aiming for this in our work. But I think the thing about humane education that has really drawn me to it is how it goes about doing this. And it does so through the development of critical thinking, empathy, and by inspiring compassionate action for other beings. And kind of provides this framework for making this a reality, for reducing suffering, for making this a more humane world for all. It kind of helps guide us, or at least that's been my experience. And so, there's so much I want to share about this topic, but we are at 20 minutes out, so I'm going to kind of go through these next few slides a little quickly, because I want to at least give you a brief introduction into how critical thinking and empathy development can lead to compassionate action, and why this matters in our roles as pet professionals. But also keep in mind that this is a very new area of research, looking specifically at humane education in the pet profession. There's very few people who are kind of researching this and doing this work. So definitely like be willing to like experiment in terms of like, what does humane education look like in what I do, and also let me know how it's going. I really do want to hear your thoughts and ideas on how humane education can be integrated into your work. So let's take a quick look at critical thinking. So humane education strives to challenge the biases that we have about other animals by inspiring critical thinking and reflection. Critical thinking is a basic process that begins with recognizing what assumptions influence how we think and act. And as we are interacting with our clients and communities, there are subtle yet powerful ways that we can teach critical thinking. We can kind of go through this process that we kind of did together earlier, kind of prompting our learners again to think about their thinking, to kind of question like, well, why is it that we hold this belief about this animal? And, can we kind of encourage our learners to question their assumptions. And how we do this, it needs to be a kind of collaborative process. We need to get curious together with our clients, because I think we can't just, ask our clients, like, well, what is that? Because that, well, you have to really, really make this a process that you're doing together. Asking ourselves like, well, how valid is this assumption? And, and gosh, if this animal could perceive this assumption that I have about them, how would they feel about it? But, I recognize that this is kind of a thing that we're not very familiar with, right? Having these types of conversations with our clients. And it might make you feel a bit like this dog. Hopefully you can see the dog that I'm showing. And if so, you're not alone, right? Like these questions can be tough to ask. And I think like how uncomfortable going into some of these topics of like, critical thinking with our clients, for example, how uncomfortable that kind of makes us feel speaks to how important it is that we learn humane education strategies. And these strategies can't be implemented without, first building a trusting relationship with your learner. You both have to feel safe enough to kind of explore these questions together. And this also includes making it clear that the conversation is a judgment-free space where your learner won't be judged, blamed, or shamed for their assumptions and beliefs. And this is something, especially with those of us who, are in settings where we can, work with our clients over a period of time, like in veterinary hospitals or training businesses, we can really take our time building this trusting relationship and getting to a point where we can start to, again, get curious together and be like, do you think that about your dog? That's interesting, and I think it's possible to also do this in settings where you kind of just have a one-on-one, one-time interaction with someone. But again, these aren't conversations that aren't delicately handled, if that makes sense. And so, we have to approach these conversations, not with the goal of changing what that other person thinks, because, we probably all know that that's often not very successful. But instead, we just have to like kind of inspire our learners to, to again, think critically, to take more informed actions, to kind of look at their own behavior and think about, how would my behavior change if I thought differently about this animal? And we need to model all of this for our learners. We have to, kind of walk the talk by critically thinking out loud in the presence of our clients. And I think that this vulnerability can deepen our learners' trust in us and help them feel safe enough to share and ask questions as they engage in their own critical thinking process. So my hope is that, teaching these critical thinking skills in the context of our companion animals will not only improve the relationships between our clients and their companion animals, but will also provide them with some invaluable skills that they can apply to the interactions that they have with other beings. And hopefully with how they kind of interact and treat the natural world. So humane education strives to foster empathy in order to help learners understand and understand how their behavior influences other animals' experiences. Empathy is defined as an emotional state induced by recognizing, understanding, and caring about another sentient being's perspectives and experiences. And sentient beings are those that can experience a variety of emotions and feelings such as suffering, pain, fear, joy, and so much more. While everyone can agree that humans are sentient, there is still disagreement in some spaces about which other species are sentient beings. And so this belief in sentience, it's a prerequisite for empathy. And so given the role that we play as pet professionals in improving the relationships between humans and other animals, again, I think we're in this unique position to show that other animals are indeed sentient beings who deserve our empathy and compassion. So through the development of critical thinking, empathy, and humane critical thinking, let me say that again. Through the development of critical thinking and empathy, humane education can promote compassionate action. Empathy has been described as, a bridge to compassion. And while empathy is being able to recognize and understand another's suffering, compassion is being moved by it. Compassion is what inspires action to, to decrease the suffering that these other animals are experiencing and to improve the welfare and well-being of another being. Well-being of another being. And so preventing and decreasing suffering, is vital. And this can include removing scary stimuli in an animal's environment, ensuring their basic needs are being met. But I think it's also important to recognize that positive emotions, positive states such as comfort and pleasure and playfulness, these are also so important to non-human animal welfare. And so compassionate action, I believe, should include preventing negative welfare, but it also should aim to provide positive welfare. It should ensure positive experiences as well. Humane education can guide people on this, on how to make humane behavior changes that allow other animals and nature not just to survive, but to thrive in our, historically human-dominated world. So throughout this presentation, I've said that we need to act powerfully and to take compassionate action. But what does this really mean? What does this look like? And I think, the first thing that I think we should focus on is, in order to inspire compassionate action in clients, in our community members and colleagues, we first need to take compassionate action ourselves. And this can take many forms. And so I have a few examples that I'll share with you, just to kind of get you thinking about, how might you take compassionate action in your own life and in your own job. So first, we can promote the use of humane, force-free, fear-free training and handling methods when caring for other animals. We should also be taking steps to make our spaces, our physical spaces, safe for all beings. And this includes various species as well as diverse populations of humans. So, for example, in veterinary or shelter environments, this might mean creating a calmer environment using classical music and pheromones and sound barriers and non-slip surfaces. That can be very helpful for the non-human animals and even some of the humans as well. And then this can also include things like removing gendered language in how we label our bathrooms, or using non-gendered language in how we address other humans we don't know. Or when you meet someone, when you introduce yourself, saying your pronouns so that that other person feels safe enough to do that themselves. So, that's just the tip of just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of like the many things that we can do to create environments that feel safer, that are safer for all of the beings who exist in that space, who come into that space. Compassionate action must also extend to how we treat the environment. We can adopt more sustainable practices and policies. And we can also become more mindful consumers who learn about what products are made out of, how they're made, and where they come from. This includes, looking at what products you might use that contain animals, and what are the conditions of those animals? Are there alternative products that you can use? So it's really just about, applying these critical thinking skills to our everyday practices and taking action to try to make change, to try to create this more humane world. So, pet professionals as humane educators can model compassionate action and how they care for both human and non-human animals. And these contexts provide opportunities for learners of all ages to also practice compassionate action in their own interactions with other beings. And the more we're able to practice behaviors, the more likely those behaviors will last. I'm sure all my animal trainer friends will agree with me there, right? We need to kind of provide opportunities to not only model these behaviors for our learners, but also give them opportunities to practice these behaviors. And so, I urge you to consider, like, how will you model compassionate action for your clients and your community? And how are you doing so already? Because I know you already are. You just might not call it that, right? So feel free to share your thoughts. If you want to share what you're doing, what you hope to do, so that we can kind of all learn from each other. And so, we've discussed quite quickly humane education in settings such as veterinary hospitals, shelters, and training businesses, and how it has the potential for teaching critical thinking. We can help our clients, our colleagues, engage and acknowledge these biases and assumptions, and how they might be influencing how they treat other animals and the environment. And I really love this quote: humane education is needed to cause a major shift in our cultural consciousness, a shift from viewing animals as them to viewing them as part of us. And so humane education in these contexts can also foster empathy for other sentient beings. And especially in combination, critical thinking and empathy can inspire people of all ages to take informed, compassionate action. So, more research and discussion is needed, but I really believe that pet professionals as humane educators can inspire people to not only better care for their pets, but to better coexist with all animals and the natural world. So I have lots of references that if you are interested, you can email me and I'm happy to share my references list with you. Lots of really, really great books and papers that I'm happy to share with you. And my research on this topic is still ongoing. I still feel like I'm very much in the early stages of it. So, if you have thoughts, if you have ideas about how pet professionals can integrate humane education into their work, I would love to hear about them. So you can reach out to me via the methods on the slide. We do have a few minutes for questions. I do want to just say thank you very much to everyone who has taken the time to listen, to watch. And thank you, to the Human Animal Bond Association for the opportunity to share something I'm just really passionate about. And yeah, so thanks everyone. And do we have questions?
Yeah, well, thank you to you, Emily. Thanks so much. This has been great. I think it's you covered an awful lot in an hour. I went by fast. I know you and I could probably sit here for another 2 hours, 3 hours, and go through all this good stuff. So yeah, and I think for me, I think there are so many obvious connections to the broader One Health discussion. And I did some graduate work on that recently, talking about systems thinking, and it all fits so beautifully together. But it's all about the empathy and being able to think your way through it, and listening. And those are hard things to do, but that's the kind of mantra that we just need to continue to beat. Talk about. I'm still stuck on pizza rats myself, but I do have a couple questions that were texted to me. I don't know if I have full visibility to the chat pod, but I don't see anything dramatic in there at the moment. But I do have a question about that. But then this, for 4 minutes, this might be a tough one. But what do you think about the pluses and minuses of the usage of anthropomorphism to help people better understand other animals? And that there certainly are benefits to that, but there are negatives as well. And is it something that can be used or completely should be avoided in this discussion?
That's a great question. And I mean, I think you kind of answered it, right? Like there are benefits to anthropomorphizing because I mean, that's kind of how we empathize, right? Like I think empathy is tied into that a lot. I also think, we should remain aware of how we're doing that and again, how it's influencing our behavior towards that animal. I think that we have to kind of draw this balance between recognizing that other animals do experience things that are very similar to what humans experience. I mean, of course, we have limitations in fully understanding what that's like for them. It likely is different for other species, but we do know that they experience a wide range of emotions that we can at least relate to. We know that they experience the ability to suffer, and they experience fear and pain, but they also experience things like happiness and joy, and so I think that we can acknowledge those things, and we should, and that can help us, deepen that empathy for these animals. That I think is necessary to motivate the general population to take compassionate action. But I also think a part of that is recognizing what we do know about that species and what we don't know. So in a way, like I guess my where my mind is going is, like there's a difference between recognizing like, yes, my dog can also experience, happiness, like, and I experience happiness. But what makes my dog happy might be very different than what makes me happy, and so like recognizing, or there's also similarities, right? Like playing makes us both happy. So I think we just have to find this line of like acknowledging the wonderful similarities that we share with other species, but also acknowledge, like being able to respect and care for other species, even when they aren't the same as us. Even like we shouldn't. An animal shouldn't have to be human-like to deserve care, to deserve compassion. So yeah, I mean, it's a complicated thing to think about, and I could definitely keep talking about it, and I'm like thinking about it in my head, but I probably should.
Part of it is to know, I think, is knowing your audience too. I mean, I think this is a weird example, but when I was really little, I the little boy reflex when you see a spider is to just jump on it and stomp it. And my mom would always say, "Why would you do that? I mean, his mother and his father would be so upset if he didn't come home." And it was a ridiculous thing to say in scientific terms, but it sure made me rethink that entire experience. Like, oh my God, you're right. Why, go home, little spider, go. And so I think, you know, that you wouldn't do that most likely with an adult, but and you would you know, change your story to an adult, but knowing your audience is important. Well, cool. Thanks so much. I wish we had another 24 hours or so to talk, but maybe if we're lucky, we'll get you back someday. I appreciate your time so much, and I appreciate the support from the Human Animal Bond Association. If you're not a member yet, you really, really should do it. There's a lot of cool stuff available for members and more stuff coming. So with that, you've got Emily's information, so feel free to reach out, and you can reach out to us as well at the Human Animal Bond Association for thoughts or questions. And with that, I will say goodnight to you all and take care.
Thank you.